Hello everyone, Ross here at Teacher Toolkit. Normally a Monday night video, this week Tuesday for obvious reasons. This week I'd like to talk about lesson planning. Now, people that have followed me for a long time would be very familiar with my 5-minute lesson plan. I've met a good few hundred new teachers to the profession in the last week or so, and I know all of them are going through that natural process of struggling with subject knowledge, behavior, school routines, policies and procedures, and the burden of lesson planning. So a little video to support people in that process. I've got a couple of slides here, so let me just get that up here. I'm going to start with this. This is my sketch notes. That's all 34 sketch notes within Markplan Teach. This is one that supports the kind of cognition with lesson plans. What we've got here are kind of three phases, I suppose, or three potential traps. We find an interesting object or an activity. We then redesign the entire lesson around the activity to suit the learning, rather than re-engineering the learning intentions and the activity, the objects, the activities there to support that process. That's the first trap. The second trap is we've got to get through X number of lessons by Christmas, so we plow through regardless of checking if something has been learnt. So it becomes an exercise in just getting through all the curriculum material to ensure we've covered it for an exam or whatever it might be, rather than doing more content in greater depth. The third trap is planning too much. And this often becomes a bit of a risk for new teachers when we're being observed in particular. So if I just swap to this slide here, the 5-minute lesson plan, just to kind of walk you through this. We've got here, and in fact, I'm just going to take this title off so you can see the slide a bit better. We've got typically in the profession where when you're new to teaching, you can either be bombarded with detailed lesson plans. You've either got a form template to fill in for somebody else, whether it's an observer, your initial teacher training provider, or your school. Occasionally we do doorknob lessons. We turn up, we make it up as we go along because we haven't had time, or we find we've got distracted en route to a lesson or whatever it might be. And these two extremes are not sustainable. We can't do what's on the left, 25 lessons a week, although many new teachers do. You can be doing this for a couple of hours just for a 1-hour lesson. Or on the right-hand side, it's not fair if you did this 25 lessons a week. It's not fair on yourselves or the pupils, and it's going to lead to lots of anxiety for yourself. So the 5-minute lesson plan evolved from these two pressure points, trying to come up with a nice balance. I know many people around the world use this resource, but there's always one new teacher who's not yet heard of it. So here is a little video tutorial to pass on to that colleague that you might know to support the process. I'm going to walk you through it, and I promise I'm going to be 5 minutes, or I will need to rebrand it. So stage one, we've got here the kind of lift pitch, the big picture. So questions to ask yourself here is: describe the lesson in 30 seconds. Where are your students' starting point? What did they do last lesson? What's happening next? How many students? All the resources available. Describe the context is essentially what's needed here. Objectives. So we're thinking here, what do you want the students to learn? How do we break down the curriculum sequence into small chunks? Check what students already know, ask them to write it, to say it, and think about the timings that you have available. Too much time, too little time, etc. This phase, the most engaging teachers tell stories. So how do we hook students into our lesson? How do we make aspects of our lessons memorable? How do we get our lessons off to a flying start? How can we use the hallmarks of effective stories to help bring our curriculum to life? I used to have a stickability note up here. This is now this research on retrieval practice, been around for 130 years. Nothing new. It reminds us that we should make learning hard, and by doing so, retrieving what was learned last lesson rather than today is going to support retrieval strength. So we need to ask students what they learned last lesson, last week, last month, and try to connect all those kind of different material contents over time to help strengthen that recollection, that recall. The present new material stage is where we introduce today's lesson to the new material. So we need to do this in small steps. we should be familiar with cognitive load theory, one or two people. If you're not familiar, there's lots of research on my site you can unpick. 3 to 9 pieces of information. Limit your instructions to be very explicit, very clear. Use dual coding. So in this context here, I'm using words and images to support the process. I'm sharing my slides step at a time rather than like this all at once and overloading your working memory. Stage 5, we need to consider in our lesson plans the models we're going to use. So here's one I made earlier. This one didn't work. When will I introduce those models? When will I take them away to elicit metacognition? The great phrase, I do it first, watch me, we do it, then you do it. So I do, we do, you do. It's a really important strategy for new teachers to grasp. Next stage, scaffolding versus fading. So the word fading here comes from a piece of research called cognitive apprenticeship. I give you all the resources, so differentiation. I plan the resources, but I don't throw them to all the students all at once. I introduce them as and when required and fade them away as and when I need students to move to a new level of thinking. So do take a look at cognitive apprenticeship as and when you need to. We've got lots of other things we have to consider in the classroom: your literacy, your numeracy, your reward points, all the logging in, all the admin, use of a second adult. Where do you sit in the class? Where do you move pupils? Seating plans A, seating plan B. There is so much to consider. But ultimately, when we think about lesson planning, we must remember to focus on why rather than what. And there's a message here for all lesson observers out there. When we ask our teachers or teachers that we go to observe not what you're teaching, we should ask them why. We're going to draw out this deeper process, deeper thinking about our curriculum intentions and why certain things happen at certain stages rather than the kind of mechanics of what I'm teaching without unpicking that rationale. So the stickability phase here strengthens those learning intentions from the start and from the end, and when we then teach the students the next lesson in the future. So how do we make content stick? Storytelling, retrieval, quizzes, etc. So the stickability here, what's the key thing you want students to take away with you, with them, and then bring back to lesson? The last phase is the sequence and flow. So things that we need to consider here are how long is the lesson, how many slides, what resources, practical, sitting, outside, a whole range of scenarios. But we need to also think about what content we're going to guide, what content we're going to allow independence, paired work, self-assessment. So there's a whole raft of things that new teachers need to master. I've shared this resource many, many times. There's always somebody new to this resource. It's probably the most downloaded teacher resource in the world. I'll stick my neck out there. It's got a good 3 million downloads on my site alone. So if you've got a new teacher profession, I suspect at this time of the academic year, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, they're probably going through that pain of not just meeting their new classes and settling into school routines, but they need to consider how to smarten up their lesson planning process rather than working hours at the weekend getting all the lessons started, planned for the start of the week. One last thing for all of us, the 5-minute memory plan. I won't go through all this in great detail. Here's an adapted version for people that are pros at teaching how to use cognitive science to improve not only how you teach, but how we, our understanding of how we learn. So this is all explained in the resource you can download on the website. And that's all I'm going to do for this week. A nice short, sharp video. I promise I will try and be back next Monday evening regularly. So thanks for watching. Pass this resource on to somebody you know. And if you want the sketch note, let me just show you what that is. Here it is. Here's the full card. There's 34 of those inside Mark Plan Teach. I'll send you this one, which is a nice 60-second summary of everything that I've shared with you today. Other than that, have a good week. Thanks for tuning in, and I shall speak to you this time next week. Bye for now.